Hi, Rachel.
Hello.
So, I think it's important or relevant or interesting. So, Rachel and I met on Facebook one night
hmm
trying to convince people to be nice.
Yeah. I did not let the claws out, and I think you noticed that I was being very
So good.
careful.
Yeah. So good. Yeah, I do too. Actually, I'm pretty over 99% of the time, I'm very you know, restrained, and I'm much more professional on Facebook than I am in my professional life because I don't know, I try to be nice, but you did not let the claws out. You were being so good. Um, but then we connected, and when I found out that you were a sex therapist, I was like, you need to come on my show, which sounded
Yes.
really weird because it was like 10 o'clock and we were both a little tipsy. And um,
But I've done that too, because I also have a podcast, and then I'll meet some people, and I think that what they need to say has to end up on my podcast. So I'm like, hey, do you
interested.
do you want to join my show?
Yeah, you have to. You just throw yourself out there and see what happens.
Yeah.
I tend to stalk people. I've stalked a few people into coming on the show. There's this podcast called The Alarmist, and I love it. And the host of that, I just repeatedly kept stalking her, and I finally got her on my show. And then it was the most awkward episode ever because I could tell she was like, "How weird is
Just trying to get you off my back.
exactly?"
Like, yeah.
Exactly. So it was not a great episode. So note to self, stalking may work, but the results aren't always
The
fantastic.
quality
Yeah,
over the quantity. Yes, I
exactly.
understand.
So I was talking to someone, who was it? One of my friends, and I mentioned that I was excited because I was talking to a sex therapist. Uh, this was last night, and she goes, what does a sex therapist do? And I was like, I don't have a fucking clue, actually. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the training involved. I don't know. So could you tell me also, how did you end up being a sex therapist?
Yeah. Okay. So that's quite a lot, but I'm going to start first with what we don't do, since a lot of specifically men seem to think that we do things that we don't do, and I have a lot of penises in my inbox. So let me explain. We do not tell you if your genitals look weird. We are not doctors. That is not our qualification. We also do not touch your genitals. In fact, we do not touch anybody. Why? Because we are mental health professionals.
Yeah.
And every mental health professional has it in their ethics that they are not permitted to touch their clients. There are very specific occasions where that line can shift, but it is absolutely never the genitals.
Yeah.
So
it's so sad that you have to explain this. Yes, that's
right.
Yeah.
So when I first, and I'm putting this in quotes, came out as a sex therapist, my mother was working very deeply in the Sephardic Jewish community in Brooklyn. She still kind of is, but she's recovering from COVID, so that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And she's recovering. That's a miracle.
Yes.
And so many of these people had assumed that I have sex with my clients. I am not having sex with my clients.
Yeah, that's
okay?
a prostitute. It's very different. Yeah.
Right. So sex workers, sex surrogates, and sex therapists do different bits of work. So I do the safest version. I am a mental health professional, and then I have a master's of social work from NYU. And then as soon as I finished NYU, I went straight into a PhD program at Widener University. It is the only accredited PhD in human sexuality education with a clinical center. Thing is, never finished the PhD because I went and I had a kid and I did not have the funds to do both.
Sure.
Like raise the child that didn't ask to be here, or continue with your pursuits. I realized I'm not that narcissistic and decided to be a parent. And so I have a master's degree in human sexuality education with a clinical focus. So that means that we studied sex therapy type stuff as opposed to just education.
Gotcha.
So there's a bit of both.
How
So
long
that's
were
what
you
I
in
do.
how long were you in the PhD program?
I started in summer 2011, and I left. I like, this was the dumbest thing because I took all of the exams. So I was finally eligible to begin my doctorate. So I went past the master's degree, and I left at around 2015. So I took a short break to, like, be with my baby, and
Yeah.
then I came back to school. And then I was in school for about a year, and that's when I was done. I couldn't do it anymore. I was literally nursing her in class, so that wasn't going to work.
I understand. I have a postdoc in theory. I have a postdoc in psychoanalytic, psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic therapy, except that I'm technically one class and like two classes and one case short of it. And I'm never going back because it's on the Upper East Side and I don't have the ability to mother and travel and do it. But
Yeah.
so I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And why sex therapy?
Yeah.
I think this was something I was doing my entire life, and I'm pretty sure most therapists will say that too.
100%.
I was that person. I was that person that people went to. I went to the yeshiva of Flatbush, which some people, in the five towns are familiar with. We didn't exactly get formal sex education.
No.
We had a very nervous biology teacher telling us that sperm dies in hot water, but that's not a contraceptive. And that's all we learned. The rest was during our bar and bat mitzvah training when we learned about periods and puberty. And so we kind of understood the mechanism of sex, but that's it. We didn't even learn basic comprehensive sex education, which is where you learn about, sexually transmitted infections and, pregnancy prevention and stuff like that. And we didn't learn any of that. So I became a teenager with the internet. The internet became widely available. I was on it by the time I was 14. And I was interested in actual information. So when I would do searches, at the time there was no Google. It was an AOL search.
Yeah.
When I would do searches for accurate sex education, I was looking because people were asking me for whatever reason. They felt like I wasn't going to judge them, and I guess I didn't. And I mean, there were other really painful experiences with this, is that I was ostracized and I was mistreated and I was slut shamed, and there was a lot of anger.
Are you talking about specifically within the religious community?
Within the school system. I mean, when you go to a school like Flatbush, you don't really get to have life outside of that because you're in school for 10 and a half hours a day and you have homework and projects. So, you're constantly surrounding yourself with the community. And so everywhere I turned, I was battling all of these assumptions about what girls should be. I immediately was told that I needed to take care of my appearance. I was that girl playing sports in the streets with the boys. So I felt like parts of me were being taken away so that I could be marriageable.
Right.
Or that my cousin could be marriageable, because if you have a slut in the family, the rest of the family suffers too.
Were you slutting it up, or were you just curious?
No, I became way slutty after high school.
I respect that.
And still, very proud of my sluttiness. Very directed sluttiness, with very specific people. But in high school, I was not. It was just having the information or willing to seek the information that made me slutty.
Gotcha.
To this community. And so, the same people who were harassing me were the people who were nervously asking me for help.
Right.
And I had learned that I didn't let my ego get in the way. I didn't become vengeful. And that was really important to me, that as a teenager, I had learned that most of the time, people who are mean to you are actually struggling.
Yeah.
They're actually having a really, really difficult time. And I had helped my harassers get out of abusive relationships.
Wow.
I helped them, get services that were needed. very much needed after certain things had occurred. I had helped a friend who was assaulted by another student get help. So again, the same people who were harming me were the people who were being hurt. And I understood that this was a very specific power, a very specific gift that I have, and I needed to learn how to manage it without being a martyr. And I think that
very precocious too. I mean,
yes,
I was a very dumb teenager, but so.
Oh, I also did lots of dumb things.
Okay, fine.
I did lots of them. I was sneaking out of the house. I was experimenting with drugs. I was doing all sorts of stuff too. I
was too chicken shit. So like I disconnected my alarm system so that my window so that I could sneak out of the house, but never had the balls to do it. And then my mom read my diary and I got punished because because she refused to believe that I never had the balls to do it. So
yeah. I also had a really strict parent. So yeah. And more so, again, because of the position that we held. If you don't know the community, there is a hierarchy. If you earn a lot of money in a very specific way, you have a lot more privilege. You can dress in different ways. You could be seen with different people, and that's okay. But when your mother works, that means that you're not rich enough. Okay. And so you have to behave in ways like you have to adhere to the rules in a very strict manner. And so the girls in my grade were allowed to wear bikinis. I was not. I had to be more modest. They were allowed to dress in far more revealing dresses at the Sweet 16s and at community weddings. I was not permitted to do that.
I didn't even think of the idea of someone going to a yeshiva wearing a bikini.
Well, Flatbush is a modern Orthodox school. It had shifted a lot. The community changed a lot in the last, I graduated in 2002. So we're talking 18 years ago.
Yes.
Right. So before that, the Sephardic community was becoming the core community of that school. And so they had a different, expression of Orthodoxy. It didn't match the same one as the Ashkenazi model, and they became the main populace there. And so it wasn't a lack of religiosity. It was just a different way of expressing modesty and celebrating Shabbat and the holidays. And then the community itself had shifted over that decade and change. And now they've become more, adherent to Ashkenazi standards.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which in many ways is, it's to be expected, but also sad because, there's Ashkenormativity is a concern.
What's the concern? That's a very big word to string together.
Ashkenormativity.
Yeah. What does that mean?
So it's adhering to the standards that exist, similar to, like white supremacist standards or heteronormative standards, where you take a queer couple and then suddenly make them fit a standard that exists in heterosexual relationships, which we've seen with a lot of, like in the marriage equality movement, we've seen a lot of gay couples kind of, take on the roles that they believe that heterosexual relationships have as they got married.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so instead of adding diversity to the expression, we're adhering to one kind of expression.
Gotcha. Okay. Someone used the term relationship anarchy the other day. So
I'm a relationship anarchist, so I want to know that person that you.
I will introduce you to her. I will. Yeah. So I thought it was very interesting, and she was explaining it to me. So
yes, relationship anarchy is fascinating because you can live, a pretty normative life. Your outward expression can fit that, but what's nice about it is that you're recognizing that people change over the years.
Yeah.
And so there's an openness and a willingness to recognize that change without being concerned about what that means for the relationship.
Yeah.
you let your relationship morph into whatever it becomes as you become adults, because people don't stay what they were in the beginning of the marriage.
100%.
Right? People have very distinct changes every 7 years, physically and emotionally and psychologically. And we know this, like we know that our cells physically shift,
right,
and change. So by the time 7 years, the skin that you had 7 years ago is not the skin you have now.
No, it's funny. A few years ago, so I will, June 11th will be my 15th wedding anniversary. But when I met my husband, I was 23, he was 29, I had lived on my own, and, that was fine. But like, we were talking a few years ago, and he basically told me that he thought I was more subordinate when he met me. And I said, well, I thought you were more open-minded and fun, and I think probably our traits have gotten more exaggerated over time. And we've had conversations like, looking back, like, if I met you today, would I marry you? And the answer is often complicated.
It is complicated, and that's like really kudos to you and your husband for having that conversation.
Well, we're both shrinks, so
yeah, shrinks are
we're
shrinks
the craziest. Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
totally got into this job to figure out what was wrong with me and or my family.
Yeah. I came into this field for answers. I wanted to know, because I was angry. I had rage, and I shifted that rage around. I moved it around.
What was the rage at? Or, I mean, it moved, but
everything. Everything. At first I thought that extreme misogyny that I had experienced in school was specific to the community. And then I get to college, and Where did
you go to college?
I didn't go very far. I went to Brooklyn College. I needed to work. I worked 3 jobs and put myself through school. And this is, you want to hear how fucked up I am, but message on resilience.
Yes.
Here. I ended up working in my high school.
Wow.
Yes, because it's just a few blocks away from my college. So it benefited me. I was able to start working at 7:00 in the morning and go to my first class at 11.
Right.
And then come back to work.
I agree. It's a fine line between fucked up and repair.
Yes. Well, repair requires breaking sometimes.
Yeah.
And so my anger was really, I wanted to be the woman that I was, and I felt that there was nowhere to turn to understand who that is.
Right.
And honestly, there really wasn't. Growing up, like now I know who I am, and I understand who I am in the context of the world that I'm living in. I really love acceptance and commitment therapy, because it helps you move into yourself in the context that you exist in. I can only be me when I'm surrounded by people who are unlike me.
That's really interesting.
Right? I can't, right? Because I have a drive to understand and be present in spaces where I am different. What that would be like. And it took me a long time to realize that.
So say this again. So you can only be you when you're in spaces where people are unlike you.
Yeah. I have made the most amazing friends in the 5 towns.
Yeah.
Where I thought that I was going to be super lonely. When I moved out to the 5 towns, I was concerned that there would be only people like the people that I see in the 5 towns. And I met some magnificent feminists, some incredibly well-read people who created a balance between their religious expression and their feminist expression and their liberal expression. I found some incredible people, and you don't get to value that when everybody around you shares that value.
Why not?
Because it's rarer.
Gotcha.
If I was living in Park Slope, right, I'd be surrounded by people who hold my belief systems. It would be difficult.
Yes.
It would be difficult for me to figure out who is the friend.
Yes, I absolutely understand. It's when I also felt like when I moved out here, my intelligence was respected more, in particular by men.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so it was like I went to a very good private school in Florida. I went to Georgetown. You know, I got my doctorate, and I never thought of myself as particularly bright. And then when I moved out here, it was the men who would like notice it, and not in like a hitting on me kind of way, but just it made me think of myself differently.
Do you work with children primarily?
I work with teenagers.
Okay.
I don't work with children. My husband works with children. I don't work with children.
Yeah, I don't work with kids.
I don't want to work with kids because I don't want to work with their parents. That's what it is.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's
also,
why
you should not be working with children because they should not be having sex.
Well, first, teenagers or children, they are having sex.
True, but I wasn't counting teenagers. Yeah.
And this is actually the bread and butter of why I'm here. Children have a sexuality. They masturbate, they explore, they ask questions, and most of the time, parents fuck that up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of the time, parents fuck that up. So I'm not gonna, like there's a range of ways that you can approach that with children. And I'm not a trauma specialist, so I'm not talking about anything related to trauma. I'm a pleasure specialist. I'm a pleasure activist. I help people recognize pleasure in many different ways. And so when I talk to parents, I'm telling them that when they approach their children, keep the doors open.
Yeah.
Understand that your discomfort with sex is part of why you have sexual problems today. Do not pass the baton onto your children. Face that discomfort and learn how to be present for them more than be present for your discomfort.
It's interesting. I do a lot of like little mini videos on the first day of quarantine. I did like how to talk to your kid about Corona, or I'll do these like little Facebook lives or whatever, but yours would be a really good one. You should that's an amazing.
Talk to kids about pleasure and sex.
Yeah.
So I actually started a class at the Friedberg JCC who's for parents, but most of their children are queer. So that's why it wasn't really advertised for everyone. It needed to be a safe space for parents of queer children.
Yeah.
And they have, what's really great is that they have a play area where all the queer kids get to hang out with each other while their parents are at this meeting.
Right.
And it's really nice. So I have wanted to launch something like that for this particular community, and lots of people seemed a little bit scared to show up. So I wonder if it was online and they didn't actually see one another there. It might be different.
Why would they be scared to show up? Or are you talking about just the religious portion of this community?
I tried to launch it at the JCC of the Greater Five Towns, and they were interested in the subject, the JCC, but they didn't find a lot of interest in the community.
Interesting. I mean, it's sad though. I mean, listen, my mother was very open with me about sexuality, but like absurdly open. Like my rule is sort of like when you ask, you're ready to hear the answer, And so I do not think I asked. And the next thing I know, she was drawing a very detailed diagram of like ovaries, uterus, my parents also spent I've seen both my parents naked on several occasions. My mother, I had to explain to my mother that what are those underwear called, that they're like booty shorts underwear do not count as you wearing pants when you're in my house with my husband and my children, like, you know.
Right. So boundaries, right?
Yeah.
So I try to enforce the idea that nudity is not inherently sexual. My daughter sees me naked all the time, but she does not see me naked in suggestive underwear, right? Like it's strange. It's more common for her to see me completely naked than with certain underwear on. I will make sure that, like, especially now in quarantine, there's nobody to wear that for. So it's always it's interesting how, and it's not simply because I'm like forcing her to see, she's walking into my
no. I'm in the same place. Like, I'm getting dressed and my son walks in the room and he goes, "Nice butt, mom." I'm like, and he's making a joke, but it's it's pretty open, although my husband has a very different approach to, like,
yeah and I think that some of that also has to do with how we treat men and their relationship to children, because we have all of this abuse happening, that we're aware of between adult men and children. That, right, like when we hear the horrible stories, we hear that the perpetrator is an adult man, right? We're also not paying attention to the fact that plenty of women have had sex with teenage boys, but that is not seen as abuse, right? We see that teenage boy as a lucky young man. We don't recognize that as abuse, but when it's a young girl, we assume that, right? Like when it's a teenage girl, we assume that she didn't want it and that she was assaulted. When it's a teenage boy, we assume that he wanted it. So both are messed up perspectives, because nobody's listening to the actual person who has had the experience. And as therapists, we know that the client is the expert, not us.
Right. My husband also used to work a lot with sex offenders, and then before that he was a public defender in the Brooklyn court system. So he is, I think, there's a lot of baggage in that. That comes with that. So
exactly. So in the context of that, it does not surprise me that your husband will be a lot more buttoned up about his nudity around the children than you would be.
Right. And also the kids and I are very it's funny, we're very like loose in our words and our they still, my son doesn't really walk around naked anymore, but we were watching none of us are like walking around, but like we were watching some movie that we shouldn't have been watching, and they used the phrase angry masturbating. And so now like that's like it's when my husband's not home, the kids and I, because he has to go to work, he works in a psych ward, inpatient, so the kids and I will sort of like make a joke, like if my poor son disappears, or he's like downstairs in the art room or whatever, and we'll be like, where, I don't know, he'll come up, I'll be like, where were you? He was like, he'll say angry masturbating, or like, it's our
that's the coin term now.
Right. It's like, it's just our thing. We just can't say it around daddy because he gets pissed, but he thinks we shouldn't be talking about things like that.
Wait, does your husband listen to the podcast?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
So you're good.
My husband doesn't listen to the podcast. My parents don't listen to the podcast, which is why the podcast is my voice to speak openly about anything and everything.
Oh, okay. So I'm the kind of person who says everybody is welcome to listen to the podcast, and that's not going to censor what I have to say. And my dad has listened. So the podcast that I have is called Sexistential U.
That's a great name.
It's an amalgamation, thank you, of existential and sex.
I got that part.
And U as in university.
Oh, I did not get that part. Okay.
Yeah, because it's a sex education podcast. And so my co-host and I bring a lot of ourselves, our history, our relationships into the podcast. We speak a lot about our perspective coming from where we are, because that's all we can do.
Right.
Plus the data, the stuff that we've learned and
Right.
we're organizing for everyone. And my dad has listened to the podcast and has learned a lot of very fascinating things about me that he didn't know. And I'm like, you listen at your own risk, Dad. And he's kind of avoidant, so he's not gonna confront me.
My husband doesn't even like when I tell my friends about an argument we've had. So like, it's just best for our marriage to stay standing. He should not listen.
Good call.
Yeah.
It's nice that you have those boundaries.
They're not like spoken. They're just like, okay, but tell me what a sex therapist does.
Okay, so it depends what the presenting problem is. And so sometimes I'll work with couples, sometimes I'll work with people who are in open relationships or in polyamorous relationships, so they have more than one partner, or I'm working with a specific sexual dysfunction.
By the way, I really want to work with a poly, I'm really intrigued by that, and I'm really looking to open up, because that sounds like it would be fascinating. Yeah.
Oh, it's lots of fun, but more fun is more drama. Okay. So understand that you need to know how to navigate that. I am a person with 3 partners, so I can tell you that it can sometimes get a little intense. But most of the time it's lovely. And so I speak with people that are coming from all walks of life. And so if we're talking about a sexual dysfunction that is not medical, and we make sure to rule that out in different ways, I will combine, certain exercises that are basic exercises that a sex therapist should know to help them, understand their PC muscles, also known as Kegel muscles, to be aware of their body, to understand embodiment, to understand that trauma lives inside the body and how to navigate that. Although, again, I am not a trauma specialist. So if somebody is dealing with complex PTSD, which means active traumatic responses, I would not work with them. I would refer them to a colleague that is a sex positive therapist. So this means that we're not, we challenge the sexual ethos that exists, and help people identify their own values as opposed to the values of where they live and where they grew up, so that they can own their own perception and their own idea. This becomes difficult when you're working with particularly religious clients, because their value system doesn't matter to them. And so I have to work within what feels right to them and what they're willing to navigate. And so I have become very well read and well versed in the Tanakh and the Talmud, which can be offensive to a lot of Orthodox men, because I will sometimes know certain excerpts better than they do, and I'll be able to find that information. And some of the clients that I work with believe that women should not learn Talmud.
Okay.
So it's very difficult for them to work with me, because I am going into their own space and very much in a way that I'm not supposed to. So it just depends on the client and, how much they're willing to look at the parameters that they have. And
can you share the story that you told me that from the Talmud, or that?
Oh yes. Okay. So this came up when I was working with an Orthodox client. He's Hasidic, and he explains that his wife is willing to go with whatever he decides. And I'm not fully clear on that. I know that this is somewhat how they are raised, and so I don't know how comfortable she is navigating certain things, but the spirit of what he wants is something that I'm willing to work with. He wants more pleasure in the sexual life with his wife. And so I told him this story. I brought up, I was like, did you ever think it was interesting that Rivka and Yitzchak were told that they needed to face each other in order for Rivka to get pregnant. And he looked at me and I was like, what do you think was going on, right, between them? Because Rivka and Yitzchak had one of the most fascinating relationships between all of the, the parents, the forefathers and foremothers.
Right.
Simply because it seemed that their relationship had the most desire. Like they both seemed to really desire each other. There wasn't a lot of drama or shadiness in their dynamic, right? Like even though Jacob loved Rachel, because he was forced to marry her sister, there was already so much strife and weird shit going on over there.
Yeah.
And Abraham was like, all right, I guess this is my wife, and she was a child when they first met, so all of that was very strange, but Rachel and Isaac seemed to have a very interesting egalitarian relationship. Rebecca, and Isaac had a very egalitarian relationship. And the thing about them is that Rebecca was very assertive and Isaac was very passive, right? Which is considered a gender role switch.
Sure.
In the biblical sense, right? And in the way that characters in the Bible are often described, this is a very interesting and loving dynamic. So when they couldn't have babies, they had to be told that they had to face each other. And all this makes me think is, okay, so, right, like sex therapist brain, doggy style sex, as long as it's vaginal, could get somebody pregnant. So what kind of sex are they having?
Right.
Is the question. And so as soon as I posed that question, I didn't mention doggy style because I figured. I had to send videos on how to make out, right? So, and this is not the first Hasidic client that I had to do that with.
On how to make out, you said?
Yes, because that's not part of the education for them.
Wow. Okay.
It's about having babies and like being with your wife, like you have these 2 weeks that you're permitted and 2 weeks that you're basically not permitted because of NIDA. And so you need to make the most out of these weeks. And so that's what you do. And that's a mitzvah. And make sure to do it on Shabbos, unless Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos. Right. And that's when you can't. It's, they're not learning the love and the care. They're not learning the pleasure part of it. They're learning, and they're calling it connection, but there is no connection. And so I like it. It's cringeworthy to watch, how to make out videos, but
now I totally want to watch one. I want you to send one to me because I want to know what it looks like.
I'll send it. Okay. I'll send it, and maybe you could put some in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely.
But they do kind of, like you need to find something that gives enough details for somebody who's never done it. Right. And so for a person who, like making out is lots of fun for me and it's like a staple activity, it is not something that leads to the next, which is something that I have to teach people. Like, hey, did you ever consider just making out with your partner? And they're like, what? And I'm like, how about kissing, not for the point of sex?
Right.
Right? Like, can we stop calling it foreplay as if sex is the only play? This is such male-centered sexuality. Can we just focus on an activity that's fun?
Right.
And do that for a long time? Like, why does one thing have to lead to the next?
Right.
It's so goal-oriented.
I agree. And also, like, if you think about it, like, when you're dating someone and before you have sex with them, like, it's, it's, like making out is everything and it's exciting because it, how far am I going to go or where is this lead? Or, or even just it's exciting in and of itself.
Right. And then if you go back to a time before you ever had sex.
Yes. Right.
Right. How tittling was making out. It was like the thing that you were so excited to do. And when it was, and of course, as a general we know that some people just don't particularly like making out and that's their, that's
right.
Okay. There are other activities. But when we're talking about this, we need to recognize that once people have sex, it seems like that's all they're trying to do, and it takes the fun out of it.
Yes, and especially I would add, you know, just a general statement, obviously. Once you have children and you're trying to have sex around, you know, like trying to fit it in places, it's like, you know, it's easy to forget the fun of it.
Yeah, exactly. It is difficult, and it is also difficult to navigate, but I'm just like, okay, what would happen if your children saw you kissing? I'm not talking about full on makeout session. Like, what would happen if your children saw you kissing? And some of the clients are like, oh, yeah, that's not a problem. They never have. And I was like, well, what do you think you're telling your children?
Yeah.
When they don't see you being affectionate with each other? They're like, oh, well, we hold hands every once in a while. We'll cuddle. I'm like, but why aren't you kissing? They're like, well, we only seem to kiss each other before sex. Right? And I'm like, yeah, that's very common. And I understand that. But I'm like, kissing is not sexual.
Yeah.
Kissing is affectionate. You know,
is this just in like the more religious community that you hear this, or?
No, this is mainstream. This is everywhere. I see this everywhere. Most in Hasidic communities, kissing is not really an activity that is focused on at all.
Right.
And if it is, it's very basic, like simple kissing, like the same kind of kissing that they would like kiss their child, you know, and they definitely don't do that in front of the children. And I'm not challenging that at all. But I'm talking about in general relationships, people are very afraid to be affectionate. They're constantly creating layers away from sex in front of their children, and they keep attaching all of these things to sex. So that's why nudity inherently becomes sexual to them, right? Like nudity is not sexual. Somebody's naked body is not erotic. It's their body. It's literally all they have. Right.
Yes, 100%. It's I am a little surprised that people don't kiss their partners in front of their children.
Yes, people are very afraid, and I think that they're afraid that they might be harming their children. I think they're afraid that their children are going to be uncomfortable, and it's really their discomfort that they're protecting. Yeah. Because if they were doing this all along, their children would see this as normal.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. So it's, and if they weren't doing this all along, they can create a normal for their children where they start doing this. Right. You know, playfulness is something that needs to exist in a relationship. So that's what I help couples do when I work with couples. I introduce playfulness. I introduce pleasure for the sake of pleasure and not a goal-oriented sex. I help intimacy come back to the relationship. A lack of intimacy tends to make the fights angrier. Yeah. You know, it makes them more scathing. There's a lot more criticism and scolding. I bring attention to the 4 horsemen, yes, as the Gottman Institute identified. Yeah. So it's funny, they took it from the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And so we look for how couples interact with each other. And often the way out of a relationship, the way a relationship, you know, falls apart has to do with being as far away from the intimacy as possible. Yeah. Right. And so obviously I can't inject intimacy. I have to now backtrack. I have to stop the behaviors that break them away. And I have to help them, you know, kind of move through that, which is very difficult because when you're feeling like you can't be vulnerable with your partner anymore, you know, you can't be intimate with them. Intimacy is vulnerability. And so when there's criticism and defensiveness and stonewalling and all of this avoidance in the relationship, it's almost abusive to try to tell somebody like, okay, now try to touch your partner in a loving way. Right. You know, now be naked, you know, with your, you know, emotionally and physically in front of this person who you feel just, you know, tore you apart. Right. No, it's true. I also think
I mean, I think people fight less when they have sex more, but you know, depends on the
Who
person.
has time to fight when they're fucking?
Exactly. I have one more question. I mean, I have a million, but for the purpose of this podcast, I have one more question for you. So, I have I also have some Orthodox, I grew up thinking that there were only three options, like conservative,
Orthodox,
reform.
Reform, Conservative.
Yeah. And then I met a man from Hewlett and came out here and was like, what the fuck? And so as a result, I generally don't, I try not to say any descriptive words because of religion, because I feel like I'm gonna fuck it up. So I had to consciously listen to you say Hasidish. And so so I started working with more and more very religious people, and I'm working with a guy who is in undergrad and he wants to go to medical school, and he's super focused and super very impressive and all of that stuff. And yet we were talking about Corona, and I said well, I don't want the world to open yet because I believe in science. And
you don't believe in science.
He actually,
you acknowledge it as reality.
Yeah, exactly. But I like saying it my way. It sounds funnier. But he actually said to me, but you can't just operate based on science. You have to operate based on, and the examples he gave were about then you don't bother trying to save a premature baby if they're born, because science says the statistics are not in their favor or whatever. And then something else. And then the point was, no, it's this way because God wants it, and you have to believe in God. And I was very put off by a future medical student placing more emphasis on God than than on science. And obviously I was not brought up in this way, but it almost, in that one moment, it almost felt like an indoctrination of some sorts,
It is.
Okay.
And something that isn't focused on when you speak to somebody like that is the idea that God only helps those who help themselves.
And that's my other thing, internal versus external locus of control. Yeah. But then again, he's studying his ass off, so he knows it's not like he's praying for good grades, but yeah, I hate I really like football, and I hate when the wide receiver makes an amazing catch and then thanks Jesus, because you've been working your ass off, it just feels too.
Right. So I can argue he didn't thank Jesus for that particular thing, right? He thanked Jesus for his ability. Right.
And he busted his ass, yeah.
Yes, but not everybody can do that. If I bust my ass the same way, I can tell you that I will still never be eligible for the NFL.
Yeah.
Right? Aside from the fact that my gender is not one that the NFL accepts. Putting all of that aside, I do not have the physical capability of getting to that point. And so I think that what people forget is that nuance, right? Yeah. We're so used to thanking God and thanking, our faith space, that we're not realizing how much of us is involved in that. And we're also told that acknowledging our own accomplishments is hubris and it's against God. So he is creating this sort of balance of, if I become a surgeon and I save somebody's life, I didn't save somebody's life. God gave me that gift, and so I did that. Right. And, I have plenty of gifts that are not actualized, and I'm not turning that into anything. I happen to be very mathematically gifted. I'm great with numbers. I could do amazing things with statistics. If I really wanted to focus my life on that, I could be earning well into the six figures being a statistician, or working for corporate and figuring out how to best sell a product, with data. I could do that. but that's not where my joy is.
Right.
That's not where I gain, pleasure. That's not where I feel fulfilled.
Right.
So I don't do that. Right. I could thank God for my ability to do math and actualize that, and then thank God for my income. But I don't see that as one and the same, right? I could still thank God for having that skill and not actualize that.
Yeah, I couldn't teach my third grader fractions, okay? I literally had to call another mother and put her on Zoom to teach her fractions. Like that's how that went.
My favorite thing is how resistant people are to change, because I see so many parents getting upset over Common Core. And one of the things, like, I can't speak to any of the other Common Core subjects. I can only speak to Common Core math.
It makes more sense. Yeah.
It does.
I know.
That's the thing. I was failing math. I was failing it because I was being taught that this is just how it happens.
Right.
But Common Core math teaches you the philosophy of numbers.
Yeah.
And I, at heart, am a philosopher. This is why I'm good at math. This is why I'm good at what I do. Right? Psychology, right?
Yep.
I was going to get a PhD, which is a philosophy doctorate. If you understand how numbers work, you can then apply it in thousands of different ways. It makes it so much easier.
Yep.
But people don't want to understand how or why. They just want the answer. They just want it to happen. Right. And I think that as therapists, that's our biggest challenge.
Yep.
They come to me, my penis isn't working, give me tips on how to change it. And I'm like, well, tell me about your childhood.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? And I'm like, well, I need to know, when did you start masturbating? I need to know if you felt shame when you were doing it. I need to know what your relationship is to sex. I need to know what moral compass you're existing within.
Yeah.
Right? I need to know that information. And for you to tell me, just like, give me tips on how to make sure my penis functions the way I want it to, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
I need to open up that door, and I need to release that shame. I need to release that pain. I need to change your perspective on your problem, right, so that the problem stops bothering you so much and becomes less of a problem. The trickiest thing about sex and orgasms and all of that is that when you want it, it doesn't happen for you.
Yeah.
Right? If you're going to try to have an orgasm, that's not how it works. You need to release your body. You need to have a better relationship with your body in order to have that. Sure. Because another word for orgasm is surrender. Right? You need to feel safe.
Yeah.
And you need to feel vulnerable. And you need to be able to be so present in your body, and you need to trust your body to let go. There is no other formula. You cannot put a bunch of activities together to make that happen.
I agree. It's interesting. When I'm talking to females, especially with like the 20-somethings or, who are using Tinder, or not that I have nothing wrong with Tinder, and I very much enjoy helping people rewrite their profiles so that they don't sound like dickheads. And I also think it's like there's a female empowerment aspect of it, to be able to say you want sex and or a relationship. But
absolutely.
But I always ask, like if they're having a sex with several different people, or if they're having a lot of one-night stands, the thing that I ask is always, are you having an orgasm? Because it becomes a lot different of a I will begrudge no one an orgasm, and if you're just enjoying sex, like, go for it. Like, but if you're not, then it's something deeper that requires looking into.
Yeah. That's definitely one of the prime questions I have for everybody, by the way. So that's the thing. I had a colleague, and I found their bias, and they really had to challenge it within themselves. This is what I love about my world, is that if you approach somebody in a certain way and you get them to see their bias, they're going to explore it. They're not going to get defensive. And I love that, because most people get defensive.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And so I had a colleague who was only asking their clients who were having lots of random sex if they were having fun, but they were never asking their clients who were in relationships if they were
I asked
having
them too. Yeah. Yeah.
right. And so I wondered, I was like, well, why didn't you ask this client if she was having fun in sex? And, you know, this colleague who just like looked at me, and I was like, well, you seem to be asking all of these other clients, but you're not asking this one or that one or that one. And I noticed that they're all in monogamous relationships, and these people are having lots of random sex and casual sex and sex parties and whatever. And that's when she realized that she had this bias where she hadn't realized that she was assuming that people who are having lots of random sex are doing so compulsively. And by the way, most of the time she was right, because when people come to therapy around their sexuality,
right,
that's usually the case. But it is important to recognize that people in monogamous relationships
100%.
and long-term monogamous relationships are not happy with their sex lives.
100%.
And that's also why they're coming to therapy.
Yeah, I
therapy.
I ask, like, I absolutely, if I have a bias, it's more, I wonder if I ask the people who are unhappy with their husbands more, if they're having orgasms. But I ask, and it took me a while to get comfortable and grow up and be a big girl about it, but it factors into the relationships, you know?
Yes, it absolutely does.
Rachel,
yeah.
thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation.
It was. I'm so happy that I was able to do this.
I am too, and I appreciate it. We'll have to do it again, and you taught me so much. So thank you.
Well, I'm happy to come back, and if you have any people who are listening who have any follow-up questions, I'm willing to answer them on your podcast.
Absolutely.
So we could do like a couple of episodes answering questions if that's what you want. I'm offering.
Oh, that would be so fun. We should definitely do that.
Okay, great.
We should definitely do that.